And what they're frightened of actually reporting it to the NHS for the fear of the wokerati who run the NHS now, their fear of reprisal. You must look at all this data. You can't fear being called racist or anything else.
Well, I think, so I wouldn't want to be considered part of a wokerati, but I mean, we are very...
I think I venture to suggest it's actually a requirement for them to improve theirs. I'm very happy to share the data we've got.
Let's take that offline.
Ever wondered what happens when a mad, thick racist confronts a fantastic expert on the NHS? Well, watch as Professor Aidan Fowler, National Director of Patient Safety for NHS England, exposes the utter nonsense of racist Rupert when it comes to clinical negligence.
Well, it does appear that we have a major problem. And it appears that not only are more people suffering the consequences of medical malpractice, but the downstream costs of dealing with that are obviously rising. So I think we've got to look at the upstream and the downstream. The legal costs are a downstream result of medical malpractice within the NHS, within your department. So I've got a question, I think, for the Permanent Secretary. I mean, do you agree with me that good data is the basis on which good decisions are made rather than bad decisions? That's how I've always run my businesses. I mean, do you agree that's a logical summary of how people make good decisions rather than bad decisions?
It is entirely how we would hope to do so, yes.
Okay, well I've asked a lot of questions through my parliamentary office. So number of GP registrations by non-UK citizens, no data. Number of illegal accessing healthcare services, no data. Cost of treating those with no right to be here, no data. Nationality and immigration status of NHS users, no data. Patient category F breakdown between illegals and visitors, no data. Cost, monetary and time of translation and interpretation across the NHS, no data. On questions about standards of English in the health service, I've asked what steps you're taking to ensure overseas recruits can speak English effectively. I haven't had an answer. So I'm interested, my first question is, I'm interested to know, if you don't have this data, what do you think are the reasons these clinical negligence damages are increasing so much at the front end, not the legal end? So why are we getting these cases
With your permission,
increasing?
if I can hand over to Aidan as the doctor, thank you.
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, thank you. I think the first thing to say is that clearly we work all the time to drive down cases of harm. There isn't evidence that those are increasing, to be clear, and in fact the level of claims has not been increasing for a while now. We are taking considerable efforts around patient safety and levels of harm and believe we have had impact on that over the last period of time. That has been through a mechanism of the patient safety strategy, which was the first strategy for patient safety that the NHS has had and was published in 2019. It was published just before we had a pandemic. Nevertheless, we have made good progress with that work, including through the pandemic. And while it is difficult to estimate, we estimate that we are avoiding 1,000 deaths a year that would have occurred had we not done that work, a fundamental piece of work around how we learn from the system, how we investigate, how we involve families in those investigations far more and patients, how we report and how we learn from that reporting. And we have a massive database, to your right point about data. We have a database with 3 million incidents going into it a year from which we're learning. To be clear, to reassure you, most of those are no harm data points. So something has gone awry, but there has been no harm as a result of it, and that's about 70% of the data we see, and then another significant chunk of it is low harm. So it's the minority of those reports that involve either moderate harm, serious harm or death. But we're learning all the time from that. We have made reductions. That is estimated to save UK PLC, not necessarily the health system alone, hundreds of millions a year. But there is far more to do, and we continue to do that, and we continue to prioritise programmes around that. One of the difficulties when it comes to clinical negligence is there is not, one would assume if you reduce that you would see a reduction in litigation, but there is a difference between where we see the majority of the harm, which tends to be in older populations, and who litigates. So actually there isn't a direct connection between the two, and the areas where we see the highest levels of harm are not necessarily the areas where we see most litigation, although we aim to learn from litigation and clearly wish to see it reduced through the reduction of harm. I hope that's helpful.
Well, thank you for that, yeah. So can you explain to me then, I mean, I have had literally hundreds of NHS whistleblowers. You probably know I've set up something called Restore Britain. We've got our own whistleblowing line. We've literally had hundreds of NHS staff whistleblowers, I mean hundreds, who've contacted us about the lack of English language causing issues, as well as foreign staff not holding appropriate skills and qualifications. Now, these people, these are doctors, they're nurses, they're midwives, they're managers, they're surgeons, they're everybody within the NHS. It's not just one subset. And what they're frightened of actually reporting it to the NHS for the fear of the wokerati who run the NHS now, their fear of reprisal, so they've come to us. So, I mean, I'd like to know, you must accept the fact that we need the data. So what data do you hold, basically, on the correlation between foreign nationals and medical malpractice taking place within the NHS? You must look at all this data. You can't fear being called racist or anything else. We need raw data for the taxpayers' benefit and also for the patient's benefit. Surely we must drill down and we must find out why this is happening.
We've got the message there. Let's let Aidan answer that.
Well, I think, so I wouldn't want to be considered part of a wokerati, but I mean, we are very animated about issues around inequalities and so on, and we are hand reading, for example, and to the point about digital, with machine learning, we will get far more data from those 3 million incidents that I'm referring to. But we are hand reading the death and severe cases, thousands of those a year, and what is not coming out of that is that there is an issue around people who've come from abroad and language and communication. There is undoubtedly communication issues around inequalities in harm, and we know that some groups are affected by harm more, partly because of communication, and communication is undoubtedly important in safety. But what we're not seeing from those reports we're reading is some of the things that you're describing people whistleblowing to.
You disagree with these whistleblowers?
So I'm not disagreeing with whistleblowers because I haven't spoken to them, and it's important that people feel able to speak up. And one of the things that we are very focused on is the concept of psychological safety and people being able to step forward and talk to us about these things.
Rupert, can I just say that if you've got cases of whistleblowers, there's a proper procedure to deal with those, and if the NHS don't know about them, they can't do anything about it. So
my whistleblowers, Chairman, they're not reporting it to the NHS for fear of reprisals from...
There are systems for them to do so through freedom to speak up, which are I know people are very concerned about themselves when they whistleblow, but there are very safe systems for people to speak up, and they do not suffer any harm as a result of doing so through our freedom to speak up system.
Clearly these people don't agree.
And indeed we would encourage anybody who has any concerns to come forward and raise through the processes that Aidan sets out.
To be fair, Rupert, if the NHS don't know about them, they can't do anything about it. So I think we perhaps need to set up some offline meetings to see how we can deal with this.
I'm happy to do that, Chairman, but I do think the NHS needs to improve its whistleblowing line and make sure people do feel comfortable to come forward. They wouldn't come forward to Restore Britain's line if they thought they were going to be treated fairly by the NHS whistleblowing line. I think I venture to suggest it's actually a requirement for them to improve theirs. I'm very happy to share the data we've got.
Let's take that offline.
I also believe you should improve your dinghy spotting skills and quit harassing charity rowers off the coast of Great Yarmouth, racist Rupert. How can you disparage these folks who either immigrated here or had parents who came here from all over the world and raised their children to work very hard in the NHS? How dare you use your status and influence to point a disgusting, dirty, racist finger at these incredible heroes who work for our magnificent institution known as the NHS. Also, racist Rupert, I'm pretty sceptical of your pathetic whistleblower chart, whatever it is, given your inability to distinguish between charity rowers and vulnerable refugees and dinghies. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that these whistleblowers, racist Rupert, are unlikely to be who they claim to be. I would say that these guys are simply bigots who saw a doctor or another nurse who appeared simply foreign to them and began clunking their knuckles on your website, because only other racists who support you and your miserable organisation will know how to find this dumb racist webpage. Also, if I were Aidan Fowler, I would have called out racist Rupert out for his whistleblowers, and I'd have said, yeah, I know the lying racist Rupert. See, the thing is, when I had to go undergo emergency spinal surgery in 27, two things struck out for me like a ton of lead. First and foremost, I appreciated the excellent care and attention I received from the wonderful team prior to, during, and following my spinal surgery, especially from a lovely, beautifully softly spoken nurse who had to check my blood pressure and temperature every half hour after I left surgery. And you can imagine I was still clearly out of it, but she kept apologising for, interrupting me when I was trying to sleep it off. But what caught me was a soothing voice, and she had a lovely accent. So I asked her where she was born, and she told me she was from the Ivory Coast. And I basically said to her, no need to apologise, and I just thanked her, for being there during my time of vulnerability. Secondly, they had to confront an awful lot of racism from some of the patients. One particular patient, a 94-year-old, I've seen 4-year-olds behave more maturely than this old fart. I'm sorry if it sounds out of order, but he kept everyone awake, had to be the centre of attention, and then accused one of the nurses of taking his wristwatch just because she were black. Yeah, and after yelling the ward down, it turned out that it'd been in his trouser pocket all along. And also I saw additional scenes of racism. For me, we don't deserve these lovely, sympathetic heroes who labour long hours for pitiful salaries and worse working conditions. And yet, we have this filthy, repulsive bigot pointing his racist finger at them solely for political advantage. However, this scrotum cannot distinguish between charity rowers and refugees in dinghies, has the gall to insult those who have more moral fibre in a fingernail than they will ever have in his entire body, claiming to know more about their jobs than they do, even after so many years in the profession. So, for me, racist Rupert, do us all a favour, take a deep breath, and then hold it. Then continue to hold it until everything turns black. And then you will stop being a burden on society. Because while you're alive, you're stealing oxygen from someone who can certainly put it to better use. But anyway, sorry for the lengthy diatribe, but witnessing this sick, racist spewy's pathetic prejudice truly hit me home really badly, you could say. But what do you guys think? Let me know down below and I shall bid you farewell. Have a lovely weekend as well, and please see my good friend Andrew Luke's latest video on E-petitions in the description box below, and take care, my friends.